He promised safety, luxury, and unbelievable returns. Investors lined up. Governments applauded. But behind the white suits and private jets was a $7 billion lie. This is the rise and ruin of Alan Stanford, one of the largest Ponzi schemes in history. Welcome to my YouTube channel. If you're fascinated by true financial crimes and shocking real-life stories, make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on the bell icon so you never miss a deep dive like this one. Now, let's uncover how Alan Stanford fooled the world, and how it all came crashing down. The rise of a billionaire. He wore white suits like armor, stood tall beneath Caribbean sun, and spoke with the confidence of a man who believed himself untouchable. To the world, Alan Stanford was the embodiment of the American dream, a self-made billionaire who built a financial empire from the ground up. His story began in the modest suburbs of Mexia, Texas, where dusty roads and small-town values framed his early life. There was little in those surroundings to suggest that this quiet boy would someday command global attention. But Alan wasn't ordinary. He was restless, ambitious, and hungry for more. After college and a stint in the real estate business, Stanford founded the Stanford Financial Group in the 1980s. At first, it was just another small investment firm in Houston. But Alan had vision, and more importantly, charm. Clients were drawn to him. He made them feel seen, valued, wealthy. He didn't just sell financial services, he sold dreams. By the late 1990s, his business had grown exponentially, thanks largely to a tiny island in the Caribbean, Antigua. There, Stanford established Stanford International Bank, which quickly became the crown jewel of his empire. The island government welcomed him with open arms. He brought money, jobs, and influence. In return, they offered him prestige, power, and, most crucially, minimal regulation. As billions flowed into the bank, Stanford's persona swelled with it. He purchased private jets, yachts, and mansions across the globe. He built a state-of-the-art cricket stadium in Antigua and created the Stanford 2020 cricket tournament, a bold move that captured international attention. Dressed impeccably and speaking with a charismatic Texan drawl, he played the part of the benevolent billionaire to perfection. Photographed alongside prime ministers, athletes, and business tycoons, Stanford looked like a man who had everything, and more. To investors, he was a financial genius. To the people of Antigua, a national hero. He sponsored education programs, donated to hospitals, and supported local development. It was easy to believe in him. He made belief profitable. Yet, behind the charm, behind the polished public image, a strange pattern began to emerge. His bank offered unusually high returns on certificates of deposit, often double what mainstream banks could promise. When asked how this was possible, Stanford offered vague answers wrapped in financial jargon. But few pressed for clarity. After all, why question a man who always delivered? Some critics whispered concerns. Why was Stanford's bank in Antigua, far from the scrutiny of U.S. regulators? Why weren't there independent audits of his financials? Why did former employees speak in hushed tones about secrecy and control? But those questions never seemed to matter, at least not yet. Stanford's empire glowed too brightly, and no one wanted to look directly into the light for fear of what they might see. What they didn't know, what no one dared to believe, was that the empire Alan Stanford built wasn't held together by brilliance or strategy. It was built on illusion. And illusions, no matter how dazzling, always come with a cost. The cracks were forming. The truth waited in silence. The lie beneath, anatomy of a Ponzi scheme. Alan Stanford didn't invent the Ponzi scheme. But few executed it with such extravagance, deception, and global reach. At the heart of his operation was a simple, insidious mechanism. Investors were drawn in with promises of safety and high returns, returns that were guaranteed through certificates of deposit, CDs, offered by Stanford International Bank. These CDs, Stanford claimed, were backed by sound investments in conservative, liquid assets. But there was a catch. The bank operated in Antigua, shielded from U.S. regulatory scrutiny, and no one outside Stanford's trusted circle was allowed to see the actual books. The truth. Those safe investments didn't exist. New investors' money was funneled to pay off earlier ones, a textbook Ponzi scheme. As long as money kept coming in, the illusion of profit could be sustained. On paper, Stanford's empire was thriving. In reality, it was bleeding beneath the surface. Stanford used falsified reports to back his claims. He invented fictional investment portfolios, manufactured earnings statements, and presented glossy brochures full of lies. Everything was choreographed to appear legitimate, from the tailored suits to the mahogany-paneled offices. Even financial advisors under his wing believed in the product they were selling. Some were victims themselves. What made Stanford's scheme so successful for so long was its facade of stability. Unlike volatile stock markets, his CDs offered consistent 8% to 12% returns, even during economic downturns. That consistency became his selling point, a golden ticket during uncertain times. Clients poured in, retirees, doctors, small business owners, teachers. Many were looking for a safe place for their life savings. What they received instead was a promise backed by nothing more than confidence and a conman's smile. But there were warnings, subtle, then louder. As early as 1997, the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission, SEC, received tips questioning Stanford's operations. A former employee raised concerns about the opaque investment strategy. Others flagged the impossibility of the returns. But somehow, the investigations always stalled. Some say Stanford's political donations and public image acted as a shield. Others blame regulatory loopholes and cross-border complexity. Regardless, Stanford grew bolder. He silenced dissent with threats and intimidation. Whistleblowers were fired or marginalized. Loyalists were rewarded with promotions and bonuses. Even as suspicion mounted, his marketing grew more aggressive, targeting Latin America, Europe, and wealthy expatriates. He opened branches across the globe, each one pulling in more funds to feed the growing beast. And still, people trusted him. Because the scam wasn't just financial, it was psychological. Stanford radiated certainty. He mingled with presidents, hosted charity galas, sponsored cultural events. He didn't just look like success, he played it like a role he was born to perform. Meanwhile, the victims, tens of thousands, were unknowingly funding his lifestyle. Their retirement accounts bought his jets. Their savings paid for his cricket tournaments. Their dreams built his illusion. But a lie this large can only stretch so far before the seams snap. And as the global economy began to tremble in 2008, the foundation of Stanford's fantasy began to crack. The money was running out. And so was time. The fall, from jet setter to jail cell. In 2008, the world changed. The global financial crisis swept through markets like wildfire, torching trust, collapsing institutions, and exposing the weak points in seemingly invincible empires. Alan Stanford's empire was one of them. As investors panicked and withdrew funds, Stanford's carefully constructed illusion began to buckle. The constant flow of new money, the lifeblood of his Ponzi scheme, slowed to a trickle. Without fresh investments to pay returns, the gaps in his narrative widened into gaping holes. And this time, people noticed. The Securities and Exchange Commission, previously hesitant, finally moved. In early 2009, after years of missed warnings and shelved complaints, the SEC formally charged Stanford with orchestrating a massive fraud involving over $7 billion in fake investments. The allegations were damning: wire fraud, mail fraud, conspiracy, and obstruction of justice. Offices were raided, documents seized, and Stanford Financial Group was effectively paralyzed overnight. Stanford, ever defiant, denied everything. Standing before cameras, he dismissed the charges as politically motivated, claiming he was a victim of government overreach. He insisted that the money was real, that the investments were sound, and that he would be vindicated. But the evidence said otherwise. Internal emails, forged documents, and testimony from former employees painted a damning picture. Behind the charm and the tailored suits was a man desperately juggling lies. In June 2009, Alan Stanford was arrested in Virginia. The man who once flew in private jets now sat in a holding cell, denied bail as a flight risk. His fall was swift and brutal. He claimed mistreatment in jail, suffered a head injury during a prison altercation, and was declared temporarily unfit to stand trial due to psychological and memory issues. The trial, delayed multiple times, finally began in 2012. For weeks, the courtroom became a stage for unraveling the deception. Prosecutors meticulously outlined how Stanford had manipulated investors, falsified documents, and laundered funds through a network of shell companies. Witnesses included former employees, financial experts, and broken investors, each one adding another layer to the towering fraud. Stanford's defense crumbled. In March 2012, he was convicted on 13 of 14 criminal counts, including fraud, conspiracy, and obstruction. The jury took just 3 days to reach a verdict. Later that year, he was sentenced to 110 years in federal prison, effectively a life sentence. His empire was dismantled, his assets seized, and his legacy reduced to a cautionary tale. But for his victims, justice offered little comfort. Most never recovered their money. Many lost their homes, their retirements, their peace of mind. What they had built over decades vanished in an instant, siphoned into the fantasy of one man's empire. Even in prison, Alan Stanford maintained his innocence. In interviews, he claimed he was set up, misunderstood, a martyr of financial ambition. But the world had moved on. His name, once associated with luxury and success, was now a warning etched into financial history. And behind the steel bars, the man who once promised everything had nothing left but time. Lessons from the Stanford scandal. The collapse of Alan Stanford's empire was more than just the downfall of a single man, it was a reckoning. A brutal reminder that beneath polished promises and glittering facades, lies can grow unnoticed until it's too late. For the tens of thousands who trusted him, the aftermath was devastating. But within the wreckage, there were lessons, hard-earned, unforgettable lessons that still echo today. Trust is the currency of finance. And Stanford knew exactly how to counterfeit it. He crafted a persona of success so meticulously that it became irresistible. He wore wealth like a uniform, spoke in polished tones, and surrounded himself with symbols of power: jets, athletes, world leaders. He didn't just ask for money. He invited belief. And belief, when paired with greed or desperation, becomes dangerous. Stanford understood human psychology. He knew that consistency, not chaos, earns loyalty. Promising steady, above-average returns, even during volatile times, he offered the kind of certainty people crave in uncertain worlds. He didn't need to convince people of the numbers. He just needed them to believe in him. And most did. But this wasn't just a story about deception, it was also one of failure. Institutional failure. 4 years, Stanford operated in plain sight. Whistleblowers raised concerns. Journalists asked questions. Former employees sounded alarms. Yet, for over a decade, nothing meaningful was done. Regulatory agencies like the SEC ignored reports or lacked the coordination to take action. Some investigations were quietly closed. Others stalled in red tape. It wasn't until the global financial crisis tightened liquidity and shook public confidence that the system finally acted. By then, over $7 billion had vanished. Lives were upended. Dreams erased. Still, not everyone lost everything. Some victims found the strength to rebuild. Like Linda Chapman, a retired teacher who lost her pension but started tutoring again to regain independence. Or Carlos Rivera, a small business owner who turned to community support to survive the blow and eventually restart. Their resilience reminds us that even after betrayal, recovery is possible. Not easy, not quick, but possible. As for Stanford, he remains incarcerated, serving a 110-year sentence in a Florida federal prison. Even now, he maintains that he did nothing wrong. In rare interviews, he calls himself a scapegoat, a misunderstood financier. But few listen anymore. His legacy is no longer one of wealth, but of warning. The Stanford scandal teaches us that due diligence is not optional. That charm is not character. That regulation matters, and so does transparency. It teaches us that even the most dazzling towers can be built on lies, and when they fall, the debris doesn't just crush the guilty. It hits the innocent first. As you close this chapter, remember this: not all thieves wear masks. Some wear suits, shake your hand, and promise you the world. And sometimes, that promise is the first step toward losing everything.